Welcome to the IntraZone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Internet. I'm Mark Cashman, here with my co-host, who I think might be climbing a giant mountain pretty soon, Chris McNulty.
Thanks, Mark. And no actual mountain climbing today, but we are going to be tackling one of the primary mountains of Microsoft 365, and that is Windows. Windows, it's one of those sets of capabilities that's been around so long, sometimes we forget it's there, but absolutely, from 1989 version 1.0 on forward, Windows has been the foundation for so much of Microsoft collaboration. And as part of Microsoft 365, we thought it would be great to bring in Jason Howard and Thomas Trombley from our Windows development team about that integration between Windows and Microsoft 365. A lot talking about what both teams are doing independently, especially as our teams are working ever more closely together, because Microsoft 365 is really that blended solution that brings together so much of Office and Windows.
I know a lot of the teams build a ton so that the service is mostly agnostic. Our user base is spanning Mac, PC. Obviously, there's the notion of Windows and laptops and iPhones and Android devices, and there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that the service can be connected to through whatever device you have. But there's a lot of work that the teams, because we own both the Windows platform and the Windows desktop experience and the service on the back end as one entry point. We know a lot of PCs out there. There's a lot of work that they do to give unique value or just a very integrated experience. And that has been true since the service has launched, and it has been more true across a lot of the different operating systems when you see it's not just a PC environment. But specific to PCs, I think there is that broad notion and broader value, both for end users and for IT. IT to a lot of the customers that are interested in the IntraZone, who are working in Microsoft 365, they think about how can I manage devices? How can I manage entry points? So a lot of the work that they do to manage devices is pretty incredible. But then to make sure that once connected, once deployed, that it's a great experience for end users. I know I've got a lot of questions for Jason and Thomas to see how they position things, some of the tips and tricks, and a lot of what the work that the Windows team does. But Chris, when you log into your PC, do you have a sense that you are working in Microsoft 365 and you don't have to jump too many hurdles to get to the whatever you're trying to do that day?
I, in the course of a day, will move amongst multiple devices, both my iOS-powered phone, and I have two Surfaces and a Dell laptop, which, based on what I'm doing, a lot of it has to do with, am I looking for multiple screens or am I looking for portability? Needing to go from one place to the other is essential. And kind of the ways that file system that we take for granted get extended with OneDrive to make sure that I have this comprehensive sync experience so I can pick up on one machine exactly where I was before. That's something that, I see as uniquely M365 and something that we didn't have a couple of years ago. And it's the thing that I thank my lucky stars that we've kind of brought in. Obviously, Mark, you and I, coming from the SharePoint team originally, we've had a focus on put your files in the cloud. We have to practice what we preach, but those integrations make it something that doesn't require as much practice or thought to make sure that you're doing that.
I think at the point that it takes over, there is a real big area that I know very little about, but I know the value of it, which is when we sign into a service, be it the Microsoft 365 service or any other, that it has to be both a very secure and a very optimized experience so that you are who you say you are when you log in. Your credentials go through whatever form factor and authentication mechanism. But once you're in, there's a lot that then takes over based on what it is that service provides. And with something like Azure Active Directory signed into a Windows desktop with the awareness of Microsoft 365, the service, I think a lot of what you mentioned, Chris, was if I have that notion of leveraging OneDrive as one example, the files are in the cloud. We know that by nature of your authentication, you're approved for X amount of files, whichever ones you have permissions to. But then it gets to how does Chris use those files? Syncing to OneDrive is the most obvious first step that we know as one big integration between Windows and the service. But I think there are other things that when you use the Office applications, when you're leveraging search, you can have that be a connected experience. When you're doing things even through some of the new browsers, the way that you sign in dictates your pathways in and really ultimately getting you to get work done faster. But, when you first were offered KFM, which is that known folder move part of OneDrive, do you remember that experience and sort of the maybe awareness or maybe no awareness of the integration work that was making it possible? Do you remember that when they enabled it for us?
It's a little unfair because I was already synchronizing many of those folders in the first place, but it's a wizard that will show up and let you know that your desktop downloads, documents, pictures can automatically be synchronized to the cloud. And, Mark, I think you were hitting on it. Like, again, Windows has gotten so embedded in our expectations. Even Windows 10, Windows 10 was rolled out in 2015. And, I know it's been pivoting to being something which is just being continuously, updated, both with the user experience and the apps that are included as part of it. But there was a time when you turned on a Windows PC and it just turned on. And I remember, I think it was in Win 95 or Windows 98, the idea of logging into your machine remotely and having profiles there, is something that the Windows team has kind of been driving and advancing. And it isn't just cloud files, but cloud identity that's really important for being able to let me, pick up from where I left off as I go from machine to machine. Like, I'm on a brand new Surface Pro that I got about 2 weeks ago. And as soon as I logged in, like, it automatically brought over all my settings and OneDrive, what my preferences are for how I like to have Excel laid out and what I do with Outlook. And that's all just stuff that we take for granted at the operating system level. And there's just a lot of magic that we've done to make sure not just that the device knows who I am, but that it's kept secure. Being able to extend that same idea of having encryption cover my files in the cloud. Like, how does that work when I bring it down on premises? And definitely there's a lot of, I would say, ongoing focus on Windows as being sort of the best home for those M365 experiences, as well as its own capabilities. Like, the Windows team creates Edge, based on Chrome. And there's just an awful lot that just is coming from the Windows team. I think it's really, I'm really looking forward to finding out what I've forgotten that Windows does in the first place, to be honest.
I think you kind of hit it with that kind of the transparent, what may be a configuration of IT on the back end. There's a lot that is there to enable that to be possible, but to have it be either a great first run experience, I lost my laptop, that recovery experience, but then just the getting to the day to day. I'm really excited to hear, what is the work that the Windows team does to help the customers plan and prepare and then execute or get into a good deployment state. And I also think the reason why we were interested is there is that enormous complementary story of, and sometimes it might be by name, we say Microsoft 365 a lot. And when you and I talk, we mean a lot, mostly the Office 365 side of it, the services, the SharePoint and Teams and whatnot. But they really think of the other side of Microsoft 365. And that's the part where I feel like there's a lot of value in what we will hear from them is the role that Windows plays in making Microsoft 365 an even better service beyond what we think of as our core services we often talk about. So I'm equally as excited. And I think both you and I are probably going to be very much in learning mode because it's going to go into the depth of Windows. So I hope everybody's excited about that. So let's turn to talk to Jason and Thomas and learn with them a lot about Windows and how it works with Microsoft 365. All right, let us turn now to actually hear from those subject matter experts we've been hinting at. Thomas and Jason, welcome to the Interzone.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for making the time.
Can we start with Thomas? Just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do at Microsoft.
Certainly. I'm a senior program manager with the Windows Servicing and Delivery Organization. We're the group responsible for floating out the zeros and ones for your monthly Patch Tuesday updates, your twice yearly feature updates of Windows 10, extended security updates, so those sorts of things. And I write comms on behalf of the engineers that are part of that 800 plus people organization.
And Jason, my assumption you sit relatively close in the Windows world, but what do you specifically do?
Yeah, I'm Jason Howard. I'm a senior program manager on the Windows Insider engineering team. Whereas a lot of what Thomas works on is for products that are in market, taking those updates, things like he just mentioned. I tend to be on the kind of opposite end of the spectrum where we work in the preview space. of things that are under development or being investigated, releasing preview builds out to insiders so they can, check them out, give us feedback, tell us what they think, help us determine if we're on the right path. And then, of course, anything that we're working on, the joy of bugs and all that kind of fun stuff. They help us uncover some of those goodies along the way so that we can make sure we actually deliver a good product when it actually makes its way out to the retail and commercial user bases.
I actually think some of your best practices over the years have bled into our side of this world, where we talk about Microsoft 365 and the development practices and getting customer feedback and putting bits out there and, being okay with it not being perfect. And so both of you are on that tip of the spear from the Windows perspective, which has been a huge engine for quite some time. And I'm really excited to talk with you both today with Chris to learn how your worlds, if we can put it that way, blend with what we normally talk about, SharePoint, OneDrive, and lots of other things. So thank you again for taking the time. Just to kick us off, I know it's been an accelerated year. We've seen huge growth in Microsoft Teams on our side and everything that draws in with the transition of the pandemic and just the change of pace of innovation. Because we don't always have that view. We read your blogs and we know about the Insiders program. But from a modern work perspective and how things have changed significantly, how would you put that in what has happened in Windows?
From my observation, and certainly Satya has touched on it a bunch of times in outbound facing discussions, is that there's been a rapid digital transformation to support the remote worker, to eventually support the hybrid work scenario where we have a mix of being in and out of the office. And I think that's going to continue to accelerate. But from March on of last year, we just saw a huge shift in wanting to support IT professionals to maintain the environments and the organizations that they're responsible for, with being able to update Windows and update those users as they sit in remote locations, albeit their homes or wherever they are, as they kind of work their way through the pandemic. So we've just seen a huge shift. And as a result, a lot of our content that we drive, a lot of the guidance that we give is really dialing in, being prescriptive with what IT professionals, CIOs, and BDMs can do today to take advantage of what they have and make sure they can support their workers to be productive and secure.
Yeah, and I'll append something to that because, Thomas did a great job of describing it. One of the words that I've heard mentioned repeatedly is frictionless. And it's about making that transition as smooth as possible, because you go from everybody being in the office with the occasional remote work kind of being the norm, and then you uproot everybody pretty much all at once. And you go from an environment where VPN capacity was fairly narrow and limited, that you didn't need some of this remote support and technical support structures and things that have had to be re-architected and kind of thrown into place. Haphazardly isn't the right word because there's a lot of work that has gone into it, but done maybe under duress because of the timelines that people have had to make these adaptations and changes. And so that frictionless word, like I mentioned, keeps popping up because the faster you can do it with the least amount of user interruption creates an environment where it allows people to adapt to not only the changes in their family life, but into the scope of work, wherein you lose some of that direct face-to-face collaboration of sitting in a conference room together or having some of those one-on-one chats, like where you actually got to speak and read body language and tone and things like that. And you do it in a remote fashion. And especially if you don't have some of the video capabilities, you lose some of those subtle nuances of communication that people used to have. And so you mentioned Teams earlier, Mark. You put the environment where you bring Teams into the scenario and you get to see and actually connect with people, even if it is in a remote fashion. And it brings back some of what had been missing. And it helps create some of that interconnected feeling where you're actually seeing the people that you're chatting with. And, there's a litany of changes that have shown up in Teams in the past year as they have made quick and very, very rapid, changes to the product to accommodate some of this. Some of their roadmap items that were planned for 6 months or a year or even 2 years got pulled in very, very quickly because of the need to make those changes and get them in the product sooner so that people could actually just jump forward into this remote environment. It really shook things up is probably the easiest way to say it.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because with all of the
digital transformation changes, remote work, hybrid work, certainly the impact it has on end user experience. A nimble IT organization hopefully is prepared to be able to deliver those quick pivots that minimize the strain on individuals. Not all starting points are at the same point. So kind of in your experience with where customers need to be going, how they can be prepared, what are some of the best practices that you've seen IT departments put in place to help them navigate this shift?
I can speak for some of that in the sense that we try and get customers focused around 3 core pillars for deploying updates and managing applications in the Microsoft 365 environment. It's really about plan, prepare, and deploy. So in the planning stages, customers can learn how they can use the Windows servicing process better to help their orgs implement really a plan to stay current with the latest Windows 10 feature updates and the monthly quality updates that address bug fixes and security concerns. Then you move into prepare, where they can learn more about validating critical apps in their infrastructure, implementing changes necessary to really reduce that time, toil, and effort around feature updates so they can accelerate feature update over feature update through the cadence of Windows 10. And then deploying them, really here customers are, they want to outline the deploy phase. We try and outline that for them, implementing pilot and broad deployments through the efforts that Jason and his team work on. Accelerating velocity is a big one. So getting them out to those remote devices quickly and just helping them improve the overall process. So that's kind of the flow, certainly within Windows servicing and delivery, that we try and get our customers working towards and help them manage that. We also help them manage it through servicing office hours that are available to them monthly, so that every environment is unique at the end of the day. Every organization has some nuance that's different from another. They're not all cookie cutter. So we try and offer up subject matter experts to help those folks that have direct questions regarding their infrastructure to reach out to our field partners, our field personnel that we have, or to reach out directly to the engineering experts that are working on the feature and quality updates that go out to these devices.
When I think a lot about what you're sharing, in this change from what may have been some notion of hybrid work, but now is a necessity, we're framing a lot of it as modern work or working in new ways, or just a lot more people working in different ways. One of the things I hear that you're saying from an IT pro perspective is the network footprint significantly changed, and getting people, who are now working from home, maybe on a different machine or one that's outside of the corporate network. And you're putting a lot of the prescriptive nature of what they should do and how they should do it, and programmatically both tools and people in place. What would you say are some of the bigger hurdles in this last year for that footprint as it grew, whether it was compliance or end user awareness, or through your programs? What are you seeing was some of the real significant hurdles?
So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey here, and I'm actually going to talk about an internal thing that happened at Microsoft a little bit, because this same thing is replicated across companies quite literally all over the globe. I'm going to talk about the new hire experience. Because one of the things that Microsoft is really good at is developing a pipeline of folks coming, they come out of college, whether they've got a 2-year or 4-year degree, or they're coming out of a master's program or whatever it is, right? They're coming into what is potentially their first, career step, first professional job, something of that nature. And rather than getting to go into the office and build some of those relationships and start what you and I, what all of us probably did originally, you show up in the office, you get a new device, you get welcome to your team, and you take the journey and start from there. They're doing this completely remotely. They're doing it in a way that is different than generations past, even as technology has changed things along the way. They'll be at home and a laptop shows up from, a delivery company, FedEx or UPS or whoever ships, they get a device and they have to set it up remotely. So the device has to have some level set of capabilities, and they have to find some way of getting their credentials, because to be able to get on corporate network, you have to have your logins, you have to have all that information. So then they get a device, they find some way to get their corporate credentials. Then they start taking those first steps of, all right, got to get Office installed. I got to get programs installed. I have to make sure I can connect to VPN. Is my home network secure enough? am I going to access corporate resources, and which corporate resources are constrained by being connected to a VPN versus those that are just generally available, right? And of course, you start looking at this at the global scale, and every company is set up differently. That word that I mentioned earlier, frictionless, right? So you have to try to make this transition as seamless as possible. You have to get the hardware to folks, you have to get them set up. And then once they're actually going, the employee journey has to be, you have to empower people to get going in the right way. It's that whole first impression type scenario, right? If a company isn't set up to get somebody in the door and welcome and up and running in a good and clean way, it's going to create that question mark of, where did I actually start working? What is this experience going to be? How do these teams function long term? And then that spills over into the teamwork aspect of things, of how are you connecting with other people? How do I have these conversations? How do I get to know the people that I'm working with? How do I build those relationships, right? How do I start collaborating and pulling together information so that I can do my job? How do I even learn how to do my job, especially for somebody that's new to a company that doesn't have years of historical experience in a particular field? Getting started is rough enough doing it in person, but doing it in this other way, now, maybe it's a little bit of an adventure. Maybe it's a little bit fun because they don't know how it was done in the past, right? So, you can look at it from the positive angle rather than just saying, oh, it's this tough path to go down. But to make the experience beneficial, you have to have all the right support mechanisms in place. This concept of being in a digital workplace where you have the right way to provide information. Are you set up on SharePoint? Is this information readily available? Did you create a good documentation path of, hey, this is how you get started. Here's the things you need to learn. Here's the corporate resources that are available. Here are the tools that you have available. And here's where you go to get support when you have questions along the way. A lot of times, companies that are just in a standard operating mode, the people that are there, and I'm guilty of this myself, you take it for granted. You've been there for a little while, you know where to go. And if you don't know where to go, you kind of know who to go ask. And when you're in an office environment, you talk to your manager, you ask your peers, and like, oh, hey, go talk to so-and-so down the hall, or give so-and-so, drop an email to so-and-so. But in this remote environment where you literally have never seen anybody in person and you haven't made those connections. And that's why I wanted to focus on the new hire aspect of it, because it's the most visible. Because this person is walking in brand new without any of this historical context, and they're relying on the processes being in place. They're relying on a support network that may not be fully bloomed yet. And so on top of needing to enable all of your current employees to make sure that they can have access and they have the resources available to them, you have this pipeline of new people that are coming in that you are counting on and relying to drive your business forward. And you have to make sure you're providing the right resources to them as well. And of course, like I said, the tooling, and you got the analytics, and you've got kind of this whole picture of everything that needs to be in place to support these folks. And then you get focused on the people that are already in place who know some of the processes, but then have to adapt to using the tools that are in place in a new way. And so everybody has to come together to say, these are these gaps. This is what is missing. Let's fill in these gaps. And now let's figure out how we all better work together to push this all forward. And again, I'll use that word, as frictionlessly as possible. But in making this massive of a change all at once, there are going to be hiccups. It's the question of how quickly do you find them, address them, and move forward becomes the deciding point on how successful you are longer term.
In looking at some of those hurdles and some of those gaps to what Jason has talked about, let's also talk about commiseration, right? We were in the same boat as all of our other customers. I remember going out, I think it was March 4th. I was on a mountain bike trip down in Phoenix running over rattlesnakes. And all of a sudden I come back on a Sunday and it's, hey, work from home for the foreseeable future. We all thought we were going to come back in a few months, right? This wasn't going to last beyond June. But very quickly, it was an act of commiseration and doubling down to help our customers make sure that they can support their environments. So we saw some of those hurdles. We had to address it with prescriptive content, guidance, one-on-ones where possible, albeit remote through Teams or what have you, but looking at things like the efficiency and regular rhythm of driver and firmware updates, applying quality updates and OS features. To Jason's point, hands-off provisioning of hardware for remote workers, even internals, especially those new employees so that they can hit the ground running. Management and protection protocols to protect data that's huge for us. Securing browser access, prioritization of security and compliance, all of those things were some of those quick hurdles that we had to make sure we could address with our customers. And I think we were able to get there quicker through a pivot we made about 2 years ago towards really driving what we call E2E, or engineer to engineer experiences. So engineers that attended our Ignite event met with engineers that were working on the actual features and services relative to at least servicing and deployment and feature development. So I think in that we could really drive like this level of commiseration that we're in the same boat. Now, granted, Microsoft has a really great infrastructure to support us working remotely already. It's fairly seamless, but it was not without some hiccups. And I think in that, everyone wanted to help. Like, there was just this great level of empathy, compassion, and commiseration towards working for our customers to help them ensure that their remote workers had the same seamless experience that we do.
It's interesting. You're talking a lot about aspects of that user experiences that are part of onboarding. One related topic about how like Windows 10 makes the M365 experience better, I'd love to explore a little bit, is to kind of chip away at the idea that the role is Windows runs Teams, and Teams is your digital workplace. And there's a measure of truth to that, but there's definitely lots of advantages of how integrating into Windows makes all different aspects of M365 more coherent and more powerful. Could you walk through a couple of examples of those that I know we were chatting about?
Well, I think Autopilot does quite a bit of that heavy lifting to help bring in some of those new workers in a more seamless way.
Well, I'll put one out there, which was the role that OneDrive plays in Windows. And historically, where it started truly was within Windows. But as an end user tool, it obviously has a sync component to it. But there's a lot more that it does. And there's a lot of work that the Windows team has done with the OneDrive team to make that. And I think back to the new employee hire, talk about, a great first experience is hopefully to all compliance officers out there also a benefit. If we look at OneDrive and how it works with Windows, there is that side of deployment of being up and running and being in a good state for the company that you really don't have to do much except for make sure you deploy it properly. We've talked about Teams. I think I have one specific question around the Microsoft Search integration. So it might be talking technical and how the Microsoft 365 apps really are optimized and built into Windows, or at least have a great experience in Windows. Do you have any of that OneDrive history or the notion of when you talk about, getting somebody in a good state, deploying Windows, being able to manage it, and then, what do they do if they're investing in Microsoft 365?
I think I look at it from a perspective of collaboration, and we've onboarded a number of folks onto our team since March of last year, since we've all been remote, bringing them in to have a seamless experience across teams so that they can quickly integrate with existing content development that we have in play. So we leverage Teams for that, and we share content that way. OneNote is a big pillar for us as a group, and relying upon sharing notes, building on content needs, creating an editorial calendar, those sorts of things. We expect other organizations will probably mimic that level of collaboration in some way, shape, or form. But those are some really key integral tools across the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that really help us. So that's like a personal perspective, if you will, that our team really leans hard on that. We're particularly collaborative. We're kind of a hub of the wheel towards getting content developed across engineering teams so we can get it out there. But we have to have these tools in place to do so. So OneNote, OneDrive, all these are critical for us to be successful.
Maybe, Jason, I am not quite sure how to frame this question, but I am really curious when somebody, whether they're in the, an early, build of Windows, or they're working through, just a common upgrade path and updates regularly. When somebody has a Windows machine, if we go back to the new hire experience, and the IT department, hands it to them or walks through them now remotely and gets them into as best state as they can. For a Microsoft 365 customer, at some point they're going to be signing in with what we call the org ID, and lots of things then happen and maybe change by nature of that awareness from the Windows side. If I'm framing this right, what is that experience or what happens with Windows when I sign in with a Microsoft 365 org ID?
Yeah. So I can, interestingly enough, give you some of the Microsoft perspective and talk about some of the capabilities. Of course, any individual IT organization is going to have theirs set up differently. So you have the world available to you. One of the funny sayings, I love saying this, right? There's the historical thing of, you are what you eat, right? Your body literally becomes what you eat day in and day out. And so in the Windows world, or in the world of technology, it's quite literally, you are what you deploy. And your environment becomes the things that you make available to people. Like on our side of things, being Microsoft 365 is quite literally everything. We use all the components of it day in and day out. It literally encompasses what we use to do our jobs. It's not just a set of tools that Microsoft creates and then provides to companies to help make them successful. We use these exact same tools. So if you're looking at Office, I quite personally, I'm in PowerPoint and Excel pretty much every day, not to mention Outlook. You mentioned OneDrive, right? We have OneDrive for business. I use OneDrive in my personal life. I store photos and all that kind of stuff. On the work side, I store PowerPoint documents. I do collaboration there. I send out links because it's absolutely secure. And it is secured with, in our environment, we use Azure Active Directory. So it is secured through focused logins. You grant people access either through individual users or via security groups, things like that. And then, of course, the entire Exchange side of things where, there's online archiving and all that. So if you need to go reference historical information, that's all available. And then it would be completely remiss if I didn't mention the security kind of, that side of things. I'm sure I'd have plenty of the dev and PM directors coming and yelling at me, right? So there's ATP, so advanced threat protection, right? We use multi-factor authentication. Of course, Defender, I cannot actually go through this section without talking about Defender. And then BitLocker, right? You want to keep the devices secure, people working remotely, people taking their devices with them when they're traveling, things like that. The airline lost your laptop, you left it sitting in a coffee shop somewhere. BitLocker helps provide that layer of security. So if the device does end up in the wrong hands, there's that one extra layer that's sitting there. It's some folks are like, oh, hey, it's just one more password I have to remember. It's not like that. It's really the more secure and the more confidence you can instill into not only your organization, but into the users within your organization, that the information that they are sharing and the ways that they are collaborating, they stay secure, they don't leak. And if the actual hardware falls into the wrong hands somehow, whether intentionally or unintentionally, there's one less thing to worry about. You create that environment of trust. And putting these tools in place creates that layer of trust for not only the company itself, but for the people in the company. Because I have trust that when I'm sharing information to coworkers, if we're working on a specific tinted project, that it's going to stay secure. It's not going to be easy to leak it, right? Or like I mentioned before, and I apologize for repeating myself, right? If I did leave my device somewhere, that it's not just going to get taken and cracked and, things that are going to end up on the internet that shouldn't be, things like that.
A lot of times on our end, we talk about OneDrive giving you the capabilities to bring your content offline. Behind the scenes, OneDrive and SharePoint are helping with that collaboration, with sharing. But in those instances, when you have documents on your machine, they are secure and compliant by nature of the service. But at that next layer of the laptop in physical locations, moving, not moving, at the home, at the office, when you sign in, you're granting yourself access back to your content. But it also, like you mentioned, BitLocker, authentication, secure by design. That is a huge part that Windows plays that really starts with, how is that machine set up? And how is it managed over time? And of course, continuing the value of when you're doing your work, you might be using an application or 10. But it's really interesting to hear you talk about once the files are on the machine, what additional capabilities are there that Windows provides for that security layer.
Yeah, and not every company and not every employee does things the same way. It's kind of a dual-edged sword. You provide people 10 different ways of doing something, and people are going to use all 10 different ways. And so you have to try and account for the various ways that individual organizations or companies want to work in their particular environment. Do they prefer direct collaboration, or are they a heavily remote organization where documents need to have a central repository with controlled access to specific teams, groups, or people? And then there's the layers of security that go into place to accommodate those. It's like what Thomas said earlier, like you get into these areas where the way that they deploy things are done differently. What cadence are they on? How frequently do they do it? What is being deployed? What Microsoft tools are they using to deploy? Do they expect people to do driver updates individually, or are they using Windows Update to push them out? Are they using policies to control the frequency and things like that? It is hard as a company to try and design something that works for, 1.3 billion devices that are running Windows 10 all around the world. Because you look at the number of configurations of hardware and software that exist, you end up in some astronomical number that's, we're talking grains of sand, stars in the skies type numbers. And to know that we have come so far in providing the tools that keep people up and running, we've sped up their ability to deploy as seamlessly as possible, while at the same time doing everything we can to keep them secure in this modern, online, always connected world. To see how fast we as a company have adapted to that ourselves, and to see how quickly we are trying to bring other companies along that journey, especially those that may have been, just say, reluctant in the past to adopt some of this, the remote work concept, this always online concept, this collaborative thing where people aren't passing around files on thumb drives. To see where we used to be and where we've come to, it makes me proud. And that's one of the things that I love about working, on the forefront, working in the Windows Insider team, is we get to showcase some of these changes that are coming and make sure that we're on the right path, make sure we're turning on the right levers to help people take those next steps. Of course, I have the utmost faith, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of working with folks like Thomas, who then make sure that these land in the hands of customers in as seamless of a way as possible, so they can take advantage of all the hard work that went in from the PMs and the devs that designed this to keep customers in mind, to help them make this transition as they keep going down this journey, this long living path of modernization, and who knows where it's going to take us next.
Thomas, I want to kind of tap into what it sounds like if there is a lot of the new tech and as it rolls out, and making sure that it fits that mold of not only how we use it, but how it's designed to be used by the world, literally the size and scale that Jason was just describing. I know one big change that's been happening, and it's kind of the last tech question I wanted to ask you both. We know Internet Explorer 11 is kind of on the down and heading out into the pasture. And the new component, which a lot of Windows experiences are delivered through, is Microsoft Edge. And a lot of Microsoft 365 as you sign into the service. But I want to more agnostically, how does the Windows team, or how do you see the role of Edge in what Windows offers?
Good question. We've been teasing out that we've got some change afoot with IE 11 and a shift towards Edge, the Chromium experience and what have you, we've shared. I think the net that I see in scope reviews and executive leadership reviews is that we want a seamless experience for those end users, while also enabling the IT pro to be the hero. So I think the experiences around Edge are set up to support both. We want those end users to be able to seamlessly access that content that we spoke about earlier across those resources in Microsoft 365, and to do it through Edge if they need to. And then, of course, we want to enable the IT pro to really be the hero in their organization. We don't just say that, we mean that. We want to enable them to push out updates with confidence. We want them to be able to do it expeditiously. We want to make sure that, because at the end of the day, when we push out an update, albeit a monthly quality update, and there's a restart involved, we want that experience to come back to that user once they restart their device, or if it did so unbeknownst to them because the IT pro had to push that update out as a security measure, that at the end of the day, that it's a seamless experience. It just restarted. The device is working as it was before. Those apps, when they fire up that application, they come up and they're visible. All those things are really important towards enabling and making the IT pro look good, because they're doing good. They're doing the great things that they need to support their organization from a security and productivity standpoint.
there's a couple things that I can add on here that I really only get to speak to because, I've had the Edge folks kind of come on and chat to Windows Insiders very frequently, or at least as frequently as possible, because of the role that Edge plays in the broader Windows ecosystem, right? Thomas mentioned the cross-device portability. Originally when this new Chromium-based Edge went out, it was very PC focused, right? But you look across the mobile platforms that are available, and it's available on each one of those now. So you get some of that productivity gain where the people don't have to be in front of their desktop at work or at their laptop at their desk at home. They can actually use their phone in an authenticated and secure way by logging in with their corporate credentials to access the browser. And if you look at Android, that has the personal profile and work profile availability. And of course, that it goes on to, hey, does the organization have Intune configured to have those policies set to devices, right? You see kind of all these aspects come together and this technology enabling people to be productive on the go, maintaining their work and personal life balances without being constrained to doing it in only one way. So you get some of those productivity boons. You get that security layer because you get to use the same single sign-on type thing, right? I can log in on my phone with my AAD, grab the information that I need, do what I need to do with it, and then be done, right? I can get out of my work profile back to my personal life, and it doesn't just stay there stagnant on my phone in case, I've mentioned, how frequently do people lose their phones or drop it? That kind of thing, right? You maintain that extra layer of security that is enabled by that. But one of the interesting things that I want to call out is if you look at historical versions of Internet Explorer and even what I'll just call legacy Edge, right? The original incarnation of Edge when it came to life, they were core parts of the OS. They received updates as part of OS updates. But you look at this Chromium-based version of Edge, and it's independently updated from the OS. Your browser has the opportunity to take new features, to take security updates, to take all these changes without necessarily relying on a major OS update to come out, or even, a monthly servicing update, right? No offense to Thomas, right? But it's the speed with which the updates can be deployed to the browser itself. They can be updated quite literally in real time on a day-to-day basis. There's generally no need for that type of speed. But the point that I'm making is it can be tackled in a independent way without having a gating function on waiting on other core components to be updated. It can take it and just keep rolling along. Chris, you mentioned, Microsoft 365 with all the management, security, and productivity tools. All of this is readily available through Edge because it's part of this broader Microsoft ecosystem. We have designed these tools to all work together. So you maintain the security and protection for your users, for their data, for their work profiles, all this kind of stuff. All of this comes together to create what I mentioned earlier of being this just really big collaborative environment that lets people do the things they need to be doing wherever they happen to be at any given point in time.
Windows hasn't had a new version number in 7 years, but obviously that's got more to do with continuous evolution. And as we see kind of the nature of digital work shifting again this year. What has you most excited about Windows when you kind of think forward to how it participates as part of M365?
This is going to sound a little hokey, but when we did Ignite H2, we came out with this message from our engineering group that from the chip to the cloud, Windows is the heartbeat of modern work. And I continue to see that with Windows. As Satya kind of alluded at Build a few weeks ago, he's like, hey, we're not trying to be cool, but we're trying to enable everyone to have that opportunity to be cool if they want. And I think Windows has that going for it, and the trajectory for growth, the attention that we've put on it. I know Panos teased it out at Ignite as well. We've got a lot of really, really good things, a lot of good energy and attention focused on Windows. But again, I think it gets somewhat back to the commiseration level in that we're all thrust into this remote work scenario that we have and this eventual hybrid work scenario. We have so many great opportunities, and we're seeing the products evolve and integrate with one another. And Microsoft 365 is huge. There's so much that someone can do and the capabilities that everyone on the planet who has a Windows device can actually go and take advantage of. I see a tremendous amount of growth coming. I'm super stoked and bullish on Windows right now. Granted, I have a little bit more visibility to what's coming, but I'm just excited in general And the team, there is just so much momentum, even while we work remotely. So I'm really glad to see that coming out.
Jason, when you think of, a lot of the conversation has been around plan, prepare, and deploy. But I think it's really led us to talk about that run state. And if that run state is to what Thomas was describing, this future state, or the continuing to work for these great future state experiences, is there anything from a insider's perspective, or how do we keep all these things up to date that is inclusive of these, just making sure the run state is always a good one, both for Windows and Microsoft 365. But from your insider's perspective, what does that look like? Just kind of last thoughts on if we've planned, deployed, and prepared in the right way, that run state. How would you describe that going into the future?
I'll say this is going to sound like a shameless plug for some of my work, and maybe it is, but I will say it anyway.
Do it.
So go visit insider.windows.com.
Yes.
Because even if you think you are up to date and you're taking all the monthly patches, you're keeping your users in the best state possible, the next piece of that run state is, well, where are you running to? You've planned, you've prepared, you've deployed, but what's coming next? Because it loops back. It doesn't just stop. You planned, you prepared, you deployed, but now you're back planning again. The planning piece doesn't stop, right? You always have to know what's coming next. Where is the future heading? What technology is becoming available? What features are becoming available? What updates are coming that I'm going to have to put to users' devices? And that's one of the big pieces where the Insider program comes into play. And we support all the major deployment methods, right? You can use group policies. You can use Intune to, do this. I won't sit here and list all of them, but if any of the major deployment methods you can think of, we have them in place. We support them. We provide ISOs to folks. And so whether you want to run this on a couple devices or you want to set up a mini deployment ring and deploy to, you say, a batch of test users within your organization, say, hey, I have 20 people that I want to make sure that these patches are going to go out in a coordinated way. I want to make sure that it doesn't break any of our line of business applications. There's no unexpected interactions. You're really planning and preparing for your next deployment. And that cycle just keeps going and going and going. So you see what we're preparing, and it allows you not only as an IT pro, right? This is where we get into the developer side of things, but I don't want to delve off into that, is whatever features we're enabling, it's going to benefit somebody. And it may be a developer. It may be an IT professional. We may make your life easier to put out some of these patches. We fixed bugs that may have been kind of dragging along and, reducing user confidence. And the more of that stuff that we can plan and get it out into the hands of users and get the feedback to say, oh yeah, this fixed this. This is great. It's our responsibility to instill confidence into organizations about the tools that we are providing. And the Insider program is one really good way of doing that. So as you get into that run state and you continue to run, just remember that as you're running, you are continuing to plan for the future. And so the Insider program provides one of many paths that you can use to stay on top of what is coming next and make sure that when you are taking that next month's patch or you're doing your next major feature upgrade, that you're prepped. You know what to expect. You've made those accommodations. And like I mentioned earlier, line of business apps, because it is so important. It's one of the things that I hear from IT pros consistently is we have these line of business apps that we cannot afford to have break. What better way to make sure they're not going to break than to take a preview of what's coming next and see if there's a change that's necessary?
And to Jason's credit, I have to share, and seeing the email threads that go back and forth, they are dynamic in their sense of listening to the feedback that comes through the Insider channel. I've never seen a group more focused on what feedback comes in to help iterate and build a better product. So it's a very simpatico relationship that we have in our efforts. We're different teams working on the same product, but it just feeds this really, really great Windows experience. So it's great to see them iterating on feedback. Like someone comes in with some feedback and everybody gloms on to try and see what they can do to fix it.
I like it. I think the guidance is deploy and deploy often and check out deploying early, so that you can unblock some of those things that might be issue or a concern about it being an issue. So we will put a link into the show notes for insiders.microsoft.com, promote that high and wide. But to both you, Thomas and Jason, thank you for joining the show. Thanks for giving us the Windows perspective. And I just was going to creep in one last thought. You, in describing the new hire experience, reminded me of many years ago before the pandemic, my new hire experience, which was a piece of paper on my desk with instructions, a number of meetings preset for me to go meet with my manager and some other folks, and a laptop that was already configured and handed to me within the network. And I just was thinking as you were describing that, I just wanted to say and tell you leaps and bounds that you've made to be able to do all of that efficiently and now within the need of the pandemic, but still to be able to do that from a remote perspective that gives the customer what they need, gives the employees confidence, and of course the IT department, something to fall back on in that it was done right. I had fun thinking about the memory, but it also helped me put it into context with what you all are doing now.
It's interesting that you bring that up. It's fascinating. Like I remember having similar discussions about productivity software, 10, 15 years ago about what first run experience expectations were kind of from the consumer world as they were kind of morphing into the professional and commercial world. I just got a new Surface as part of our refresh like a week ago. And, the ways that people have come to expect, you get a new phone, you turn it on, it syncs and you have your stuff. You get a new router from your provider, you just plug it in and it works. It is astonishing as someone who 20 plus years ago managed IT teams that used to deal with imaging software and run around and all the hand tooling that you had to do, that it all just works. And we know that there's a lot of behind the scenes effort and IT contribution to make it so, but it's just like, it's awesome and it gets overlooked.
Well, you're getting nothing but head nodding over here, so I definitely I agree with you on those points, Chris. Thank you.
I think you're probably you're hearing from us. We're just trying to say thank you, not just for joining the show, but thanks for making our life a lot easier too.
Thanks for having us, Mark and Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for joining us.
Up next on the IntraZone, events. As modern work continues to evolve and people are returning to the workplace, we're really happy to see some of our partners across our ecosystem are returning to host some hybrid events, along with some great online experiences. And one of the first ones up is for Microsoft Viva. We are having an open AMA tomorrow, June 23rd. That will be held on the Microsoft Tech community, and the links are in the show notes. So hope you can join us for that. And it is truly Ask Me Anything, or Ask All of Us, Microsoft Anything.
I actually thought that the AMA stood for Ask McNulty Anything. So if it's not just you, maybe there's more folks from the Viva team?
It is more than just me. It is the broad swath of all of the module engineering teams, along with the product management and marketing organizations. If you have a question, this is the right place to get it answered.
So don't fret that there is another event this exact same week, just a day later, very different from a lot of events that we usually highlight, but it's a big one for Microsoft, and we hope that you join us to see what is next for Windows. We don't have a lot of details about this. There will be a live stream June 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's Eastern Time in the United States. And if you're on Twitter, you can follow the hashtag Microsoft Event or go to Microsoft.com/Windows/event. You can even set a reminder if you jump in and want to make sure to not miss that. If you want to know what's next for Windows, tune in June 24th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time.
Coming up next month, if you are a Microsoft partner, you don't want to miss Microsoft Inspire 2021. This is being held completely virtual on July 14th and 15th. We'll be unveiling a lot of news from across the Teams platform, including Viva. If you're a partner, it's a don't miss. And even if you're not a partner, it's one of our major news events. So there are a lot of product updates that get timed to match the first day of Inspire. And it's completely free. You can join us at msinspire.microsoft.com on the 14th and the 15th.
Next, a little bit later in July 26th to the 30th, is a fully in-person event, SharePoint Fest Chicago. And this one's got a great headliner. We got some of our peers, really one of our leaders, Jeff Teeper, and Chris and I's old manager, Dan Holm. They're going to both be in person in Chicago, giving a great overview of Microsoft 365, recent announcements, and a lot of things to come, and really to set the stage for that entire event. There's a lot of workshops, a lot of breakout sessions, Of course, don't miss Keynote with Jeff and Dan. There's just a lot of activity, and if you're in that area, anywhere close to Chicago, I encourage you to hop in a car, drive over if you feel safe, if you feel like you've kind of gotten beyond the pandemic and feel like you're either masked up or vaxxed up. But definitely a great event always from the SharePoint Fest team, and Chicago in person, July 26th to the 30th.
Also, we have just released a new workshop to help you understand how to envision and plan a rollout for Microsoft Lists. So that is now available on demand in the Microsoft Tech Community Resource Center. And you can go to aka.ms/mslists/workshop to see the videos, content to deliver the workshop to your organization, like the PowerPoint files, speaker notes, demos, and additional materials. Finally, if you have other events coming up that we haven't spotlighted here, please reach out to us through the Intrazone at Microsoft.com. We'd love to spotlight your event on an upcoming broadcast. Once again, Mark, that's a wrap. We have completed yet another episode of the Intrazone, and I want to thank Jason and Thomas for coming in and sharing their insight about how they are preparing Windows as we move forward into the post-pandemic world. So we'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes and on the Intrazone blog.
You can always go to our show page at aka.ms/the-intrazone and scroll to your heart's content through episode to episode to episode. We covered a lot, and it's all there on our show page.
And we cover a lot, but we don't cover everything. There are a broad range of other Microsoft podcasts, and you can learn more about checking out those shows at aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts.
And if you've got something very particular that you want to ask or you want to push our way with some feedback or some suggestions for episodes to come, you can email us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or find us on Twitter at SharePoint, at @mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Word of mouth remains the best way people discover new podcasts. So if you enjoy this show, help us help more people. Share that SharePoint podcast love and follow the show on your local mountaintop or wherever you get your podcasts.
We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 What's Next for Windows Intelligent Intranet.